Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
I hear you are a little bit under the weather,
I
but the
am.
trooper you didn't cancel, so I'm very happy.
I hate canceling. I hate letting people down. So you get a sniffly me.
That's all right. I think you sound all right, though. I don't think you sound too sniffly.
Okay, good.
Um, so I'm gonna let you introduce yourself, but before I do that, I want to dispel a little bit of a myth that I think's been floating around out there, and I think that myth is that you have some sort of like you don't want what is the myth is you don't want what is best for people who identify as transgender. You care to expand on that before we get started?
Absolutely. So first you've got to define the problem rests with what how you define what's best for people who
Hmm.
identify as transgender. So the people who think I don't want what's best for people who identify as transgender have a very different idea of how to help this group of people. I can say that I would like people who identify as transgender to have the right to the same quality of healthcare that the rest of the population has access to. And by that I mean the field of gender medicine, I believe, should be held to the same rigorous standards that all other fields of medicine should be held to. And right now, that's not what's happening. Right now, the field of gender medicine is the crazy Wild West where there's no medical ethics. It's entirely guided by ideology. And as a result, a lot of people are coming to terrible harm. Of course, that I understand that the other side is gender affirming care, so called, is life saving, evidence based, medically necessary, and therefore anyone who opposes it wishes harm on people who seek it. But it's really not. It is definitely not evidence based, and we can talk about that more later. It is definitely, well, medical necessity is a very questionable term, and we can go into that. I would say it's most of the time not medically necessary. And life-saving, we know it's not life-saving either. With all of the actual literature that we have, we know it does not prevent suicide or suicidal ideation. So it's all how you define what's best for transgender people. I do not wish anyone harm who identifies as transgender. I think everything I do in the medical side of the debate is because I want these people to be better protected from the extremes of the radical transactivism that has captured the entire field of gender medicine.
So it sounds like, regardless of whether what your political ideology might be, what your political background is, what you identify as, you want the quality of life for any particular individual to be as high as possible rather than to be lowered by any means.
I mean, quality of life, again, it's difficult to measure because if a person thinks that they really need a certain medical treatment and then they get it, there's a strong placebo effect. There's a strong honeymoon period. There's a period of time where they think that, yes, this is it. This has made my life amazing. For me, I really do just want gender medicine to be actually evidence-based. They repeat this all the time that it is, and it's not. And I want gender medicine to be as safe as possible. That's all I want. And
Mm.
everything that I have written in the past few years is with that focus.
Hmm. That's that phrasing strikes me as it intrigues me a little bit, and I want, if you don't mind, can we dig a little bit deeper on that, concentrate on that a little bit more?
Of course.
Yeah, like, so we got like quality of life, and you said that's really hard to measure, and I would agree, no doubt, that's really difficult to measure. How do we figure out what's best for any particular group or individual?
In a medical sense or in a general
Uh,
sense?
It could be general, it could be medical. Maybe start out with general and then go down to medical.
I think life situation would help. So how is, for me, in the medical sense and in the general sense, if you want to see how a person is doing in life, don't ask them how they're doing, because we're all powerfully psychologically motivated to tell ourselves lies. We all do it with self-deception. Look at how the person is functioning. Do they have a stable job? Do they have a stable relationship? Are they healthy? Do they have a social life? What's going on in this person's life? Are they actually functioning well? Do they have a broad range of interests? Are they a functioning, healthy, happy human being? Rather than just, I really do dislike this self-report. Are you happy? Yes, I'm happy. Well, okay. We might all be lying to ourselves and telling ourselves we're happy when we're not.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, so stable job, relationship, health, those might be like markers that might indicate the quality of life for a person. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that a person is succeeding in life, doing well, and even if they're not particularly happy when they have all those things, they at least have a stable situation in which they can probably pull themselves out of whatever difficulties they find themselves in, because we all have challenges in life and we all hit low points. But if you lack that stable foundation in your life, the health, the job, the stable financial situation, if you lack all of those things, it's very difficult to overcome a challenge when it happens.
Perhaps. Perhaps.
It can be.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I look at quality of life, while I don't think self-reporting is like this holy grail, right? There's problems. Like, don't get me wrong, people lie to themselves, right? Um, I don't know that. I'm not sure on these other factors like a stable job, relationship, health. Maybe a relationship. Maybe that might be a good indicator.
Well, I mean, I know friends, a social life, because I know some people who are single who are very happy. So I'm not saying you need all of those things. You just
Sure.
need a good solid foundation so that you're not just in your house living in poverty, online all the time, no social life, and living in the pits of despair. And then somebody asks you if you're happy, and you say, "Yeah, I'm perfectly happy." I wouldn't believe that person, even if they said it
Hmm.
to my face.
Okay, so there might be other indicators to look at if someone says, "Yeah, I'm perfectly happy," and you see all these other things that typically wouldn't come from the lifestyle of a person who's happy. So that might be some sort of indicate some self-deception.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. I think that makes sense. Um, yeah, let's move on to whatever's next, whatever you would like to talk about next.
What? I have to lead the conversation? I mean, can I go to what we were just talking about in relation
Yeah,
to the trans issue? That makes
yeah, let's
sense.
do that. Hmm.
So this experiment's been going on for about 100 years, and about at the midway point in the 60s, they really, it's ramping up, and they're doing all these crazy surgeries and stuff on mostly men. And then they start to follow up with these men. So in the Netherlands, they follow up and they find the first wave of men, they're just not happy. But the reason that they say they're not happy is because they don't look like women. They have this, what they call a never disappearing masculine appearance. That's the origin of the puberty blockers experiment. The Dutch are like, okay, well, we failed with the adults, so why don't we just try doing this to children? We'll do it when they're younger, and therefore we'll prevent the testosterone surge, and then they'll look like women. They did the same thing in Johns Hopkins. It's going on in the 60s, 70s. They followed up with the first wave of men that they did it to, and they realized, oh, their lives are no better. They say they're happy, but their lives are no better. So that's when Johns Hopkins Gender Clinic got closed down in 1979. There was no change in their life situation, and so they came to the conclusion that they were colluding with a mental illness rather than trying to treat it, and therefore they were not benefiting the patients. But then we get the next wave, which is very much driven by trans activism, and this is hormones and surgeries as a human right. Anyone who disagrees is a hateful transphobic bigot, and they must be viciously ruined in any way that we possibly can. And now we have that wave of the experiment where we do have all of these crazy studies where they ask thousands of people who've had their penises chopped off, or they've had an appendage made out of their forearm sewn onto their groin. They ask all these people, are you happy? And they all say, yes, we're happy. And then they record it as, okay, well, this is perfectly safe and effective, and let's keep on doing it. And in fact, let's do it to kids. Let's do it to people who are, minors, under 18. And so I think the old way of doing it was more solid science. You're following up, you take all of the people that you did it to, you follow as many of them up as you can, and you see how they're actually doing in their lives. Whereas now we have no follow-up. They don't follow up anyone. They just kind of do these surveys. If you're trans and you've had this surgery, tell us how you feel. High selection bias, because anyone who's dead is not going to participate. Anyone who's living in abject misery and despair is not going to participate. You're just going to get the ones who are either actually happy or telling themselves every single day that they're happy, and they're the ones who respond. So to me, it's just not science. Self-report is useless in this situation.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. I want to back it up to the studies. I don't know what exactly the right word here. The 60s and 70s, what was done by the Dutch and Netherlands, surgeries on men. You said that more science was done with this wave. You said. Do you know how they determined whether this was a good or bad thing for these people? Did they look at the same markers that you mentioned, like the job, relationship, health?
I know the Dutch did. So this study, there's not that much literature from this time. This is the very beginning of when they actually start trying to follow up.
Mm-hmm.
It was published in 1988, and they did look at life situation, because I recall that it was noted that there was very little change in the life situation. And then they also asked them, how are you doing? And the men were all unhappy because they didn't look like women. And the men felt that all of their problems in life were because they didn't look like women. They didn't pass as women. So they were putting all the blame on the fact that they didn't, their so-called sex change, and they still look like men. And so again, it kind of diverts attention, I suppose. Like, these men maybe could have been thriving in life, or they could have overcome the difficulties that they had, but instead they were blaming all of their difficulties on the fact that they did not pass as women. And that, I think, doesn't help you overcome your challenges. And as well, if you're living a lie, I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult for anyone to live a lie every single day. And so these men, of course, they're living as women, and they're trying to be accepted by society as women, but they know that they're not women, and all of society knows that they're not women because they look like men and they are men. And so I think it's there's a massive stress on your mental health there as well, just living a lie every day.
I want to dig a little bit deeper here.
Can I just explain? Every time I take a sip of this, I pull a funny face because I made a hot toddy and it's too strong. Just if you see me making funny faces.
And for all the Americans, that's like, what is it? Tea with honey and
It's not tea. It's
it's not tea.
lemon, because I have a cold. It's medicinal. It's lemon, honey. Should be whiskey, but I didn't have any, so it's rum and hot water. It's very good if you have a cold, but I think I put too much rum. Burning my throat.
I was joking earlier that this might get interesting with that much rum. Okay, so we got this study in the 60s, 70s. They're looking at the life circumstances of these people. They don't see much of a change. It's stagnant, it sounds like. When you were describing this, I was expecting you to say that their life circumstance changed for the worse. I was like, that must be, what happened. But I'm surprised to hear it was stagnant. Like it didn't increase, it didn't decrease. Why do you think it stayed stagnant rather than decreasing?
I think so. I can't say because at the time, in fact, it was published in 1988. So it was published actually 1 year before Ray Blanchard came out with his theory of autogynephilia, which was that was first published in 1989, and that is he separates men who identify as women into two categories. The minority are homosexual men who are very gender nonconforming and have been since the earliest childhood, and they want to transition to find well, there's different reasons for their motivation or different theories, but partly they're very gender nonconforming and it's difficult to stand out, and they skew so far towards feminine anyway that they're more comfortable transitioning and living as women. The majority of men who seek medical transition are what Ray Blanchard calls autogynephilic. Autogynephilia comes from the Greek, so auto, self, gyne, woman, and philia, love of oneself as a woman. This is a paraphilia in which these men are aroused by the idea and the fantasy of becoming women. And this is a crucial, crucial part of the entire gender issue that trans activists forbid you from talking about. It's absolutely forbidden. You can't talk about autogynephilia. I would think just because it makes up the majority of men seeking this medical treatment, that probably most of the men who the Dutch treated in those early decades were autogynephilic men. Just statistically, that seems possible. And autogynephilic men, typically, it's very difficult when they become fixated on this hormones and surgeries as the answer. They can't, it's like a compulsive obsession. They're fixated on getting this medical treatment. That's not easy. That's not an easy way to live. So sure, they get it and they become what it's a disappointment because they don't look like the fantasy version of themselves as women, but they've got another set of problems on the other side. But they've got rid of the desperate compulsive obsession with getting this medical treatment. They get to the other side and they have another set of problems. They don't pass as women and it's difficult to fit in. So it doesn't really surprise me that there was no decrease. It
Hmm.
just it's a difficult, and I want people will think I'm not being compassionate here, probably. Like when I talk about autogynephilia, it makes trans activists very upset, but I do have compassion for men who suffer from autogynephilia, because I do think it's very difficult to live with. I will say it's very difficult for the wives and the children of autogynephilic men who have to deal with this man in middle age coming out as a woman, and normally his sexual drive is difficult for the wife to deal with. But I think it is a very difficult paraphilia to live with, and it does overtake your life, and that can present challenges for you. So I'm not being heartless. I just think in order to help everyone, and like the autogynephilic men, the wives, the children, all of society that has to accommodate these men embodying their paraphilia, we all need to understand what autogynephilia is.
Okay. Yeah, I think that theory would make sense with why it didn't there was no decrease, right? There's no increase, no decrease, different set of problem. With that being said, uh, what is the solution? So surgery, hormones, perhaps that's not a good strategy to get that to go from neutral or poor to increasing, right? What's the strategy to go from the current situation to increasing that life satisfaction, all those metrics of measure?
I don't know that I'm I don't know that I can answer that. So, first of all, if we're talking strictly about autogynephilic men, I think I think some can thrive. I think some can do well and live comfortably after they've had the hormones and surgeries. It depends how stable they are before they go in. It depends how they have, what kind of life situation. If they're blowing up their life and they lose their wife, they lose their kids and everything, and then they expect life to be magical and wonderful on the other side, they're probably going to be set up for some disappointment. But for the autogynephilic men, I will say that paraphilias are for life. You don't just do psychotherapy and get past a paraphilia. So I'm not even sure what we're supposed to really do with these paraphilic men. I will say that the worst possible thing that could have happened to autogynephilic men, excuse me, is the modern trans rights movement, because we are now at a place where I think it is completely impossible that these men will be welcomed into women's spaces and sports. We are a society that has had enough of the demands of trans activists. We have had enough of the aggressive, the bullying, the viciousness, and forcing themselves into us, but like women forcing themselves into our spaces. Not going to happen. I'm sorry, we don't want you. I don't care how much you kick up a fuss. So if you're autogynephilic and you go all the way down that medical pathway and then you get to the end and you're not welcome in any women's spaces, nobody accepts you as a woman, I think your life's probably not going to be very it's not going to be very easy. You probably made your life more difficult. But for the homosexual, transsexuals, they typically do better. As far as we can, there's not a lot of follow-up. There aren't many good studies to say anyone's doing well, but they typically pass better because they skewed so far to femininity. So they can move through the world with less pushback. And then the kids, which we haven't even got to, and that's my issue. All of these social contagion kids that sprang into existence around the mid-2010s, literally not one of them should be transitioned. Absolutely not a single one of them. We need to help those kids. I can say that with complete certainty.
Okay. Yeah. One thing we definitely 100% agree on is that like we have this group who is very aggressively passionate. We have a group that's aggressively passionate against them, and it turns into kind of nonsense in my opinion, where it's just like people screaming at each other constantly, and nobody's actually having conversations. So we agree on that for sure. It's kind of become a shit show.
Oh yeah.
Uh, okay.
May
So
I just, I mean, I'm probably being a bit extreme here, but may I just make clear though that that's trans activism. If you Stonewall is the former gay rights turned trans charity in the UK, the biggest gay rights charity in the UK. Their slogan for trans rights, gay rights was one, they adopted trans rights in 2015, and they're like, this is the direction we're going in. Honestly, their slogan was trans rights, trans women are women, no debate. The slogan was no debate. It was accept that these men are women and no debate. If you even question it for a moment, we will ruin you. And that was the approach of trans activism for a decade. So if you're looking at why the debate is such a disaster now and so highly charged, it's because of the approach trans activists took. They had the choice back when they were forming, and this is back in the 1990s, they had the choice. Base your rights movement in reality, grounded in reality, and go out there and persuade people. So this would be, some men are very uncomfortable in their bodies and they are more comfortable presenting as women, and would you mind accommodating them in some of your spaces? We'll let you have your sports because that's ridiculous. We'll let you have your rape shelters because that's also crazy that you could let men in there, but could you at least accommodate us in public life? They had that choice. They didn't go with that choice. They went with, these men are women, we are women, and if you deny that, we'll ruin you. Always going to be a disaster. Never going to result in societal acceptance. Never.
why do you think they went that route and not the other route?
I firmly believe, hang on, let me get a sip of water. My throat is so scratchy. Okay, I firmly believe, because of what I just talked about, autogynephilia. Why I say it's the key to understanding this is autogynephilia, the fantasy is not being treated as a woman. The fantasy is not dressing as a woman. The fantasy is being a woman. Okay? And this entire rights movement is driven by autogynephilic men. They created a rights movement in which they could live out their fantasy because they could force all of society to play along with their paraphilic fantasy. We all have to accept them as women. Otherwise, they'll ruin us. It's an autogynephilic man's dream.
Mhm. Okay.
I can't. How many people are watching? I can't see the comments, but are there comments?
For,
Is anyone?
yeah,
Is
there
this
are. Yeah, if you click on comments on the far right, you'll be able to see them. There's
okay?
14 people watching right now.
Okay, and nobody is objecting.
There's lots of comments.
Okay,
most
I'm not wearing my
most
glasses.
people.
I can't read them.
Okay. Most people have been not. I don't know what the right word to describe it is, but not like nasty. So that's been
Okay.
nice.
Well, I mean,
Um,
I think because we're on autogynephilia, it's just it's the best kept secret. Transactivism. I'll tell you why transactivists keep autogynephilia a secret. One reason is because obviously you can't base a civil rights movement on a fetish. You just can't. Like, people don't want it. Like, imagine if they'd gone out basing their rights movement on autogynephilia. Like, yeah, these men, they've been masturbating to the fantasy of having a vagina for the last 20 years, and now they want equal rights and they want to go into women's spaces. Nobody would have supported that, of course. So they don't want this secret out because they understand that it will hurt the rights movement. But at the same time, many, not all, I would say most autogynephilic men deny the existence of their autogynephilia. They don't face up to the reality of it either. They just see themselves as being actual women because they think they have some kind of female essence residing within their bodies. So they're all in denial.
okay. Yeah, I think I'm understanding what you're saying. So we got autogynephilic men who fantasize about being a woman,
Yeah.
sexually, right? And then they make up a certain portion. Are you saying that they'd make up a majority?
Oh,
Did I understand that? Okay.
they're the majority of men seeking hormones and surgeries. I want to be clear that I'm talking about those who seek the medical body modification. The majority would be autogynephilic men. A tiny minority would be homosexual, transsexuals. We also have, because we live in the most ridiculous timeline ever to have existed, we also have just garden variety transvestites. They're also women and they also have access to women's spaces, and we all have to pretend that these men, they're just transvestites. They just get turned on by wearing women's clothing, and they're allowed to enter women's spaces as well, and we have to pretend that they're women. I'm not including them in what I'm saying. I'm basically, autogynephilia is different. Autogynephilia is where they seek the medical route. A transvestite would not.
How? Let's say there's somebody who has a different perspective than you. How could they figure out that this is the case? That most people looking for hormones and surgeries are autogynephilic.
I mean, evidence of autogynephilia is everywhere if you choose to look. If you move in my world, it's everywhere. There's plenty of evidence. I mean, I think reading the scientific literature is very convincing. Like, if somebody's serious and they want to learn, the scientific literature on autogynephilia is fascinating because there's no we did an event together with Peter Boghossian, and we talked about this, I think, where there's no test. Is a person trans? There's no test.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a test for autogynephilia. And so it's probably the area of gender medicine where there is the most research, and you can be most sure that the person is autogynephilic. I wouldn't say trans because I don't believe there's such a thing as true trans, but you can be sure they're autogynephilic. And that's because Ray Blanchard did this wonderful, it's very ingenious. There's something called phallometry, which is like this pressure gauge that you put on a man's penis. And then Ray Blanchard had these men read scenarios that were non-sexual, but that were female situational scenarios. So an example would be, you are putting on mascara, and the men who are autogynephilic would get aroused at the thought of putting on mascara. Or I think I might be lying here, but I think I do recall, there would be, you have your period, you've got your menstrual period. Autogynephilic men will be aroused by the idea of having a menstrual period. So they will pick up on the phallometry. You're going to have a pap smear. They will get aroused because that's a very female thing, and that's what turns them on. So it's not a sexual thing. It's not porn. You're not having them watch porn. Very non-sexual situations that are very female oriented, and that would turn them on. So there's evidence of autogynephilia, but honestly, move in my world. There's this wonderful, I won't name him, but I live in Canada, and we have a so-called conversion therapy ban, which is darkly ironic because it just means that gender clinics have no choice but medically convert the bodies of gay and lesbian adolescents in our gender clinics. But this so-called conversion therapy ban, when they were debating it, they had this man, this autogynephilic man, and he went on this big rant on Twitter against people like me, how hateful we are, and he was saying autogynephilia is not real. And then he testified again. He said autogynephilia is not real. I'm a woman. And then his Twitter history, honest to goodness, it showed up while he was going through his transition, getting his breasts and everything. He's tweeting his autogynephilic masturbation habits to the world. There's a whole catalog of autogynephilic masturbation tweets. And this man has convinced himself that he's not autogynephilic, but it's right there. Didn't even think to delete his Twitter history. Novice mistake.
And never thought I'd be talking about penis gauges on the internet.
This is what happens. This is why I don't get invited to dinner parties anymore.
So I wanna go back to, so there's a test for autogynephilia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. There's a test for that, right? The penis gauge. Yes. Apparently. And then there's no test for transgenderism.
Right.
What's the connection? How do we figure out that most people who want to get hormones, surgeries, how do we know that all of that particular group of people are, autogynephilic?
Well, I mean, right now we don't, because even in the medical world, even in the gender-affirming medical world, they pretend autogynephilia doesn't exist as well. So nobody is testing. You could easily, if the men would have to be honest, and it's difficult because I think there's probably some shame attached to the fantasies that you have. I think there's a way to tell normally if he's a man and he's seeking medical interventions in such a way. If he's coming out in middle age and he's heterosexual and he's in no way feminine, he's pretty much guaranteed to be autogynephilic. That's just the classic autogynephilic man. That's what happens. I don't think we'll get there because, WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, that I've written extensively about, they deny the existence of autogynephilia, and we're in the activist-driven medical field where you are, if a person says they are transgender, then they are transgender, and therefore if a person is transgender and they want hormones and surgeries, it is their human right to have hormones and surgeries. That's your diagnostic process. There's nothing else going on there. And that's a recipe for disaster. That's how you end up with an actual medical catastrophe on your hands, which is what we're in the midst of right now, but we just can't, most people can't see it. We'll see it eventually, but most people can't see it right now.
Okay. I want to go back to how we would test this. You said like it's not being tested, right? And I think this might have been unspoken by you, but maybe this is what you were suggesting. I'm putting puzzle pieces together. If you're not saying this, just say, Pierce, you're crazy. I think the test would be like you have someone who is desiring hormones and surgery. You put the penis gauge on him, and then you tell him stuff about being a woman and see if he gets an erection. Is that kind of the gist of what a test would look like for this?
I don't know that you would say it to him. I think he reads it. I don't think you.
Okay, I don't know how that works.
I think that Ray Blanchard
Sure.
had them reading situations. You're not like they're like doing AGP. Well, yeah. I mean, if you really wanted to know, here's the other problem that we have in gender medicine is the people. There's a whole chain of people who treat these individuals. So therapists, that's typically unimportant because WPATH thinks therapy is bigotry. It's conversion therapy, basically. So therapy is out the window. But let's say you did have a therapist. It would, first of all, be a decent therapist's job to find out about the patient and why they've come to the decision that having their penis chopped off is going to make their life better. Why they've come to this decision that they think they are a member of the opposite sex. There's a wonderful Hippocrates quote. It's, where does it go? It goes, it's more important to know the patient who has the disease than the disease the patient has. It's far more important to know the patient. I would flip it. It would be, in this day and age, it's not considered a disease. It's an identity. So it's more important to know the patient that has the identity rather than the identity that the patient has. And so it is vitally important. This is the most important step is skipped right now in finding out why this person has reached the conclusion that they are transgender and they want hormones and surgeries. There's always, it's not an innate gender essence. It's not a mismatched gender soul. It is one of many, many different life challenges or paraphilic desires that have led a person to come to that conclusion. The first step really, really must be finding out what caused it. But that's considered a violation of their human rights because gender medicine is guided by a very extremist political ideology that says these people just are, they are trans. It's a perfectly natural, healthy way to be in life. It's a natural, healthy state of being. So therefore, you're not going to try and find out why, because there's nothing wrong with this person. You don't need to discover it. It's healthy and wonderful. Just give them hormones and surgeries. We are failing transgender people who identify as transgender, when we skip the most important step in their care.
Okay. I think what you're saying, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying these people who go into these gender clinics, I think they might be called, instead of affirming and giving them what they desire, what they came there for, hormone surgery, instead of doing that, figure out what the underlying root cause of
Yes.
why they want that, why they have this desire, right?
Yeah.
Ask them that. What's the next step after that? What do we do once we figure out that root cause?
Well, first of all, you try and deal with it. So I'll give you some examples. First of all, I've spoken to lots of detransitioners. The first wave of detransitioners has already passed, and most of those are just butch lesbians, and they mistook their gender nonconformity and their difficulties in life, because it's definitely not easy to be an extremely masculine woman or an extremely feminine man. It's not easy to be on the extremes of either side. They were struggling in life, and they did hate their bodies. They did hate the secondary sex characteristics. And because they were right, they collided with this messaging of the modern trans rights movement, which told them, if you hate your body, that's because you're a man. And you can solve all of your problems by taking testosterone and having your breasts cut off. And they really believed it, and they thought that it would solve all of their problems. And one lovely detransitioner, she told me she took testosterone and had her breasts cut off to be invisible. So every day when she went out as a masculine woman, she experienced homophobia, either just looks or actual comments. She could feel the homophobia, and she experienced it every single day. So she transitioned to be a man, so-called, to be invisible. And I asked her, and did it work? And she said, yes, it did. She was invisible. She could move out in the world, day-to-day life, as a man, and nobody looked at her, and nobody was homophobic towards her. But she still always knew that she was not a man. And when she was trying to hang out with men, they didn't know that she wasn't a man, but they knew she was different. And she knew that she wasn't a man. And then the testosterone caused all these problems, and her health deteriorated. And she realized she'd just traded one set of problems for another. And then she stopped all of the drugs and detransitioned. But now she lives as an even more masculine woman, because she has no breasts and she took testosterone, and she was already masculine to begin with. So it didn't solve anything. So I would say, if that's your reason, internalized homophobia for a gender non-conforming lesbian, you need to help that lesbian understand that that's why she feels that way, and how medical transition would make her invisible, but would just create a whole other range of problems. My whole point, I suppose, is that when you found out what the problem is, you found out why they've come to this conclusion, you try and help them deal with it. You always try to avert lifelong medicalization, because remember, the person there is completely physically healthy, probably is physically healthy, and your goal, if you are a decent doctor and you took the Hippocratic Oath, your goal should be to keep that person healthy and whole, avert the need for hormones and surgeries, and help them understand themselves and why they've come to the conclusion that this is the answer, when most of the time it's not.
Gotcha. Okay, so you found out the root cause, whatever that might be. You tried to help them, keep them whole and healthy. I think what you're saying is drugs and surgery are not likely to achieve those things. Is there anything that we could learn, or a way to test it to figure out if that actually was the best option?
You mean, is there any way to measure who's happy at the end of it? I will say, first of all, I will say there is no way to tell for whom it will be a success and for whom it will not. Completely impossible. They've never been able to tell that. Okay. It's absolutely impossible. I think if you did the work, okay, actually, no, listen to this. I'm lying here. There's a man, as Hakeem, who I've interviewed, and I adore him. He was a consultant psychiatrist at the Tavistock, at the Portman Clinic in London, which was attached to the Tavistock. The Tavistock, where the youth gender service, where all of the scandal happened, and it's closed down. He was at the adult clinic in around the year 2000. And he was a consultant psychiatrist, and he had a group of people who they wanted to transition, and they were really like pumped. Yeah, this is going to save me. It's going to solve all my problems. My life's going to be amazing at the end of it. And then he had another group, and they were the regretters. And he said they were just living in abject misery and despair, and they couldn't turn back the clock, and they were really like horrified by what they'd done to themselves. And he put the two groups together. Well, he had like separate groups, but he put those who regret with those who wanted to transition. And he said it was really effective, because he could tell the ones who were really geared up and ready to go that maybe it's not such a good idea, or you need to consider this. But the ones who had gone through it could say, yes, I thought exactly that. and this is my reality. And they understood each other better. And he didn't set out to prevent them from transitioning, he told me, but he had a 98% rate of those wanting to transition did not, after they saw the reality. And he said that the 2% who did end up transitioning went into it with much more realistic expectations about what it could and could not do for them and what could go wrong. And therefore, what limited follow-up he did, they did much better with their medicalization. I believe, as Hakeem, hit on the answer before we even knew we had a problem. And obviously, you can imagine what they've done to As Hakeem over the years. This is a very thoughtful, he's a gay man, and he was concerned about like the transing away the gay that was going on in the Tavistock youth clinic, where they take all these gay teens and they transition them and trans away the gay. He's a very thoughtful, intelligent, compassionate man. And of course, they ruined him as being a vile transphobe, but I think that's the answer.
That seems reasonable. A way to figure out who this might help and who it may not help is to give them reasonable expectations, realistic expectations, all the information that they need to make an informed choice. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as well, we've got so many victims now. I wouldn't want to put it on the detransitioners. It's not their responsibility, but if something like that could be set up, we have so many victims. They're all kind of hidden right now because trans activists will viciously destroy them if they speak out and say they regret their decision. But one day soon, the floodgates will open, especially as trans activists are losing their power to silence people. And one day soon, the floodgates will open and we'll see all the detransitioners. And then maybe that would even you don't have to be in the same room. But I think for the young people or for anyone wanting to transition, actually looking at the stories of regret, reading what can go wrong, reading the stories of detransitioners would be a good place to start, instead of going into it thinking it's the miracle cure that's going to make your life amazing and wonderful, when probably it's not.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. With regards to detransitioners, how many people do you think like go through with this and are like they're a part of that success group versus they're a part of the regret group?
I can't put a number on it, to be honest. I can say my prediction is, I don't know if you've ever seen there are graphs for referrals to pediatric gender clinics. They exist for every nation that has been touched by the modern trans rights movement, and every single graph shows the exact same thing. Around 2014, 2015, when the modern trans rights movement started, really kicked into high gear, we see like just it's normal, and then a massive inflection point, and you see the epidemic. It just surges. Every country with a pediatric gender clinic touched by the modern trans rights movement shows the exact same thing. I am convinced that all of those kids, it was wrong for them. Now, whether they will all detransition, whether they will all regret or admit that they regret, I cannot tell you. But I am completely convinced that for every single one of them, they were not trans, because there's no such thing. Like it's not a type of person. And if they were medicalized, it was wrong. But who knows? You can live your whole life convincing yourself. Imagine you were healthy and you put your body parts into this, you destroyed your health, you maybe can't ever have children, sexual function is drastically impaired, you've lost parts of your body. You're going to be as psychologically motivated as a human being on earth to tell yourself that that was the right decision, because otherwise you have to face up to the decision that you made. So it's not easy to predict regret or detransition.
I agree that that's a thing. Yeah, like people are going to, they're already there, right? So it's kind of like, and people reinforce that a lot. People are, it doesn't matter what the subject is, who you are, what you are. Validation occurs a lot in society. People are always affirming you. Nobody ever wants to say anything negative unless it's on X, and then it's all negativity. And I mean, I do get that. I do wonder, like, how much of an impact that is, though. Like, for me personally, if I were to have a surgery like that, I mean, I don't want that, so it's hard to compare me for that because I don't have any desire right now, right? I don't want to have a surgery like that. Um, but like instantly, I would be like, that was a bad idea, right? I just, I don't know. For me, it's hard to imagine that being such a that powerful of a thing. You'd think like it would be like almost everybody would regret it the day after.
Oh
I don't know.
no,
It's hard for me to wrap my head around it.
because I've been doing this for years, so I have spoken to I don't even know how many detransitioners, and pretty much all of them tell me the hardest part was admitting to themselves that they regretted it. They knew right away, or that sometimes there's often a honeymoon period where you really do feel as if it has solved all your problems and you are now on the path to happiness. um, all of them pretty much said the hardest part is you have to say that to yourself. I regret this. I made a mistake. And it can go on for months or years where you convince yourself that you do not regret it. Like a trivial example, I in 2023 got my hair highlighted for the first time ever in my life. And honestly, I knew I hated it, but I convinced myself for about 6 months that I didn't, because I didn't want to like put more color on my hair and ruin my hair. So I did 6 months of awful highlights. And then I decided to get it dyed my natural color again. And as soon as it was my natural color, I let myself admit how much I hated those highlights. I look at pictures now, I'm like, God, how could I even have convinced myself that that looked good? It looked terrible. That's trivial. That's nothing, easily fixed. Imagine you've had your arm skinned, the tissue fashioned into a penis shape, and it sewn onto your groin. Imagine you've done that. You get to the end and it has not made you happy. Are you going to admit that? How difficult is it going to be to admit that? And even, okay, listen to this. I'll give you the patient zero in the child transition atrocity. It's always, honestly, it's always a gender nonconforming lesbian, or it's a gay kid or whatever. This is a gender nonconforming lesbian. She's in the Netherlands and her father doesn't accept her gender nonconformity and she's very uncomfortable in her body, and she's patient zero. They do the puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, chop her breasts off, and then it's not quite the arm flesh appendage, but it's like they do some kind of thing. It's with the clitoris and everything. It's really not good. And so at age 21, right after the surgery, she's like, yep, I feel great. This is amazing. I'm everything. My life is wonderful. Gender dysphoria resolved. Everything's great. And then they follow her up when she's, I think, 33 or 35 or something like that. And she says she's happy, no regrets, but she is single. She feels shame about her genital appearance. She's depressed, but she's not, like, she says she has no regrets. Now, that sounds like gender dysphoria, but just gender dysphoria in an altered body. And as Hakeem, going back to him, he gave me this wonderful, the way he explains it, he's like, these young people or these people, they have gender dysphoria. They do feel discomfort with their body. And then they have a brief period when they get the medical treatment and they have gender euphoria, transgender euphoria. They're happy. This is great. Everything's wonderful. And then they get transgender dysphoria because they realize, actually, I'm not that happy with my arm flesh appendage sewn onto my groin, or my inverted penis that's a wound that I have to dilate for the rest of my life. I feel uncomfortable with this altered secondary sex characteristics, and it hasn't resolved anything.
Hmm.
I don't know what your question was. I don't know how I ended up there.
Oh, how did we end up there?
No idea. I don't know. No idea.
Either way, um, yeah, okay. Like, I think, like what you laid out, like I could imagine that being a possibility, right? I think maybe I come from a different perspective. Like I'm not a psychologist or anything. I know a little bit about psychology, but not a lot. Um, so I relate others to a lot to myself, and that might be a dangerous thing to do. Maybe I'm just cynical as fuck. Like if I make a bad decision and I'm like, and I look at it and I was like, what was that all about? Like I'm pissed off about it. I'll be honest with myself. I'm not afraid to be angry about that. So I guess that's just not something I can like personally relate to, but I suppose I can see how that could be a real thing and actually occur. How much that occurs in general population or people who want to transition, I don't know.
Well,
How could I figure that out?
I mean, if we're talking about the denial and the self-justification, this has been like there's plenty of studies on this one. The most famous one is the Stanford. I'm pretty sure it's Stanford University. They took two groups of people, and it was just simple. It was a very simple. These groups were told that they were doing some kind of initiation to get into a group, and it was like, I don't know, something about birds and evolutionary biology or something. And so they've got these two groups of people. One group, they gave a very simple task. It was just like, okay, all you have to do is read a few words from the dictionary and you get in. So they did that and they got in. And then the other group, they gave them really explicit sexual passages from novels or whatever. This is the 1950s, different time. And they had to read this. It was really embarrassing. And then they got into the group. And then they get into what is supposed to be their group. And the researchers play a recording of a supposed recording of the group like that they've just got into. And they made it deliberately abysmal. They made it deliberately appalling. And the group that had gone through nothing to get in, they're like, this is terrible. Why are we even in this group? This is awful. And the group that had to read the really embarrassing stuff, they were like, it's not bad. This guy, this guy knows what he's talking about. And the guy was like a total moron, deliberately a moron. We know that. Like when you put something in, when you put a lot in, you go through something arduous, you go through something difficult in order to achieve something. Or if what you have gone through is completely irreversible and you cannot turn back the clock, you are powerfully psychologically motivated to tell yourself that you did the right thing, that this wasn't all for nothing. That's not the only study. There's tons of studies replicating this psychological motivation that we all have.
Yeah, there's a term for that. It's lost cause fallacy or something.
Sunk
Something
cost,
along that way.
sunk cost fallacy.
Sunk cost, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's the more you put into something, yeah, the more difficult it is to say this was a mistake, this was for nothing. Now imagine many of these kids lose their sexual function, right? Like these boys, you're not having an orgasm, you will never have a fulfilling sex life because it's gone, it's taken from you. The girls can have vaginal atrophy, uterine atrophy, so they're not having much, that's impaired sexual function as well. They've lost their fertility, had their breasts cut off, so they'll never breastfeed a child. If you've gone all the way and you've had your penis cut off, or you've had an appendage made out of your forearm sewn onto your groin, imagine the sunk cost fallacy. Like you've put all that in because you thought you wanted it. You probably made everyone in your life, you probably made their lives hell. If I don't get this, if you don't consent to this, if you don't support me in this journey, I'll kill myself or whatever. And then you get to the end and you realize it was all a mistake. Of course you're going to not admit that to yourself. You're going to put that moment off as long as you possibly can. I think some people may manage to put that off their whole lives.
I could see that. I could see it. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm not normal. I genuinely think I'm like I must just be very cynical. Like I that, yeah. I think everything's terrible. So maybe that's why I can't relate to that. But yeah, I mean, I could see that being a thing for some people for sure.
Oh, it's a thing. I think you're an unusual one. I think it's a thing for most people.
Maybe. Okay. Okay. There was a direction I was going to go here. I don't recall. Oh, yes, yes. Okay. So I want to paint like. Do you have more time, by the way? I don't want to keep you here for like forever.
Oh no, I'm fine.
Okay. You're still good.
I'm
Okay.
almost done my hot toddy, and it's not hot anymore. But other than that, I'm fine.
Okay, cool. So, as you were talking, I was kind of constructing this alternate strategy to the reality that we live in. Mia's other strategy for having the best world ever, right? Okay, I'm purposely being a little dramatic there, but I think the strategy that you would want to see employed, and correct me at any point if I'm wrong. When someone goes to their medical professional, whoever it might be, and they're like, "Hey, I think I'm transgender, whatever. This is what I want. I want hormones or surgery, whatever." They go to some other medical person. In your strategy, it might be like a psychologist. They're going to figure out what this underlying reason is, in an attempt to address that underlying reason, whatever it might be, and then possibly in some cases might try to figure out if they might be one of these success cases. Am I still in alignment with what you would think would be best?
No, I mean, you can't.
Okay.
You can't figure out who's going to be a success. It's 100 years of this study, and they've never managed to figure it out. It's simply impossible because you just don't know what it's like. You won't until you've had your breasts cut off and you've taken the testosterone. You can't know whether it's going to make you happy. The only way to figure that out is to try it and hope for the best. And I don't think that's a very good approach. So no, there's no way to tell.
Interesting. I may have misunderstood you earlier. When you were talking about setting like realistic expectations, talking to detransitioners.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that's you've got your best chance of you can set up realistic expectations, and yes, those people will have the best chance of having a positive outcome. The only trouble I have, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, is the modern trans rights movement has absolutely obliterated societal acceptance. It's the most harmful. I mean, think about gay rights. Like it was fought over decades. It was done, there were some very intense periods, but for the most part, it was done open debate, persuasion, and convincing people that there's nothing wrong with being gay, and it was a very effective rights campaign. Like, sure, homophobia still exists in the world, but the vast majority of people living in the Western world really don't care, if somebody's gay or straight. That's trans rights is the opposite. Like, trans rights came along and just absolutely annihilated the reputation of the transgender community to the point now that, I think life is much more difficult for anyone who has gone down that medical pathway. The men are not welcome in women's spaces and never will be. And so these men are now going to have to find their way into men's spaces. And that's probably not going to, I don't think it's as dangerous as they make out. I think it's just not validating enough. And that's, hurts their feelings. But I think at this point, life is going to be more difficult if you are identifying as a member of the opposite sex. And if you have that, if you are a transgender and you are finding life more difficult, don't direct your anger at me and everybody else that is doing what I do. Direct your anger at trans activists for what they have done. They are the ones who are to blame. They are the ones who pushed everybody into this very extreme position where we're not having it anymore.
Let me make sure I'm understanding correctly, because I'm not entirely sure if I do. I think what you're saying is trans activists pushed for these individuals to enter into women's spaces like restrooms, sports, etc. And that is what has created a lot of anger or disdain for these individuals. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I mean, I like the comparison with gay rights. Gay rights was done on open debate and persuasion, and as well, I always look at it like comparing to gay rights. Like, if gay rights, for some mad, crazy, insane reason, if gay rights had said gay men are at risk in men's spaces, so you have to let them into your spaces. If they bullied women into, you have to have these men in your spaces. If you say no, we'll destroy your career. If gay rights had done that, nobody would support gay rights right now. We'd all be like really against gay people, but gay rights did not impose anything on women. So there was never the clash of rights. Gay rights, you just have to accept people for who they are, and that's it. Nobody is hurt. Trans rights, it's just by nature, because they rewrote what it means to be human. They're basically saying some men are women because they have a magical female essence residing within them, and those men with this magical female essence deserve to have access to every single space designated for women and girls. It's just such a mad rights movement that was always going to be a catastrophe. The only way they've had the success that they've had, which was about a decade of success, is because they were so vicious and they ruined everyone who dared to object. But you can only intimidate and bully an entire society into submission for so long. Eventually, reality is going to reassert itself. Enough people are going to find the courage to say, actually, no, I don't want that naked man in my changing room. I don't care what inner female essence he claims to have. And so it was always self-limiting. It was always going to come to an end. But the problem is, for some reason, they didn't see the end, and they didn't see how much resentment and bad feeling that there would be towards these men at the end of it, to the point now where they'll never be accepted in women's spaces. Of course not. How could we ever? We know too much. I mean, we all know too much. Perhaps if they'd done it open debate and persuasion, and they kept our attention away from all of the dark, seedy side, we might have been duped into accepting them. But we know too much now. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, and I don't know that I agree nor disagree. However, I think there might be, I don't know, like I think I might view things a little bit differently, and maybe I'm thinking myself in the box and outside the box, and maybe I've just thought about it from a weird perspective for a long time. But I kind of view it, and you can tell me if like I'm thinking about this in a strange way, as categorization. So we have like we, before all trans activism, we had men, we had women, penis, vagina. Very straightforward. Very straightforward.
All
Right?
throughout human history.
Categorization, yeah.
Until like till the 2000s.
And then it's like a recategorization, and I guess it's based off gender. Don't ask me to define that. I'm not going to be able to. But it would be, we got men, women, and then woman. There's like another category. So the sex might be men, the gender might be women. Same thing for the other side, men.
You're making no sense. Do you hear what you sound like? What does that even mean? Another category of women. How can you, if men can be women, J.K. Rowling, I think, said this recently, and she always nails it. If men can be women, the word woman means nothing. What's the other category of women? How can you have, there's women. If there's another category of women, then the word women means nothing.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and you're right. Like from what's the right word? From like a syllogism standpoint, you're right. Like that from that perspective, it makes no sense. It's like definitional wise, right? I see what you're saying. Like, don't get me wrong.
And just let me make clear. Laws are written using words, and so you need to have clear definitions of words in order for the laws that those laws, in order for the people those laws protect to have any meaning whatsoever. In order for the people to actually be protected, if your law protects women and then you go into some la la land like men can be women and everything, and the word woman means nothing, then you rob women of all of the protection in law that they once had. So it's not just some interesting philosophical debate. It has real world consequences, because you're literally changing the meaning of laws if you change the meaning of the words that those laws are written with.
Yeah, and I definitely understand that. Like, I would totally understand why women would not want people who they don't see as women entering their spaces. Like,
People
I'm
who are
totally on
not
board.
women. I get, and I just went to, there's some really important stats that need to be laid out there. And that is, first of all, in every nation where there are crime statistics, and always, this has always been true, men commit almost all violent crime and sex offenses. And in the realm of sex offenses, women make up most of their victims. That is true of any nation that collects such statistics. To be clear, I am not saying that all men are sex offenders, and most men are not, but most sex offenders are men. That is a fact. There is absolutely zero way for a woman to tell if a man that she does not know is a sex offender. We cannot tell. We're not telepathic. We don't have any magical power. That is why female-only spaces exist. Not to keep out all of the men who are not sex offenders, but to keep out the tiny minority who are, and who are a risk. So female-only spaces matter enormously. And then, the trans activists will come back with, not enough women are being attacked and raped in these spaces, so you're being transphobic. But that's a lack of understanding about different types of sex offenses. Exhibitionism is where you non-consensually view someone, you non-consensually show your genitals to, it's usually a man, and he's showing it to women. That's exhibitionism. Voyeurism is where you non-consensually view probably women in a state of undress. These two non-contact sex offenses can be committed in any female-only changing room, where the modern trans rights movement separates spaces by mystical inner gender essences, because every single exhibitionist and voyeur in the land can say, I have a magical woman soul, and then he can go and commit his sex offenses. And the victims, if they complain, are the ones who get accused of transphobia and hate crimes.
Yeah, I do totally get that, and I agree with you that most men are not. You know what I'm trying to say.
Most
I'm not
sex
going to try
offenders
to.
are men.
Yes,
men
I was. I was almost saying.
Yeah, no, most men are not
Yeah.
sex offenders, but most sex offenders are men. And
Yes.
the problem is, the men who are not sex offenders are not going to try and get into the women's spaces, because they respect women and they respect women's boundaries. The very men who are in women's spaces are the ones who don't respect women's boundaries, and therefore they're much, much more likely to be the sex offenders. It's an unworkable situation. The only way, if you care about women and girls, is to separate society by reality, the reality of biological sex. If you care about protecting women and girls, if you care about paraphilic men's feelings more, then by all means go with the gender soul.
And if you don't mind, I'd like to share my solution.
Sure.
Because when we have these two gendered bathrooms, the thing that I kind of is in the back of my mind, right? Men here, women here. If you're born with penis, you go that way. Born with vagina, go that way. I get it, and that's how it's been for a very long time. Totally understand, and it's reasonable to have that. What goes back to the back of my mind is like, I think you're familiar with Jazz, right? I think she's from Europe somewhere or something. I don't remember.
Jazz Jennings?
Yeah, Jazz Jennings.
Jazz is American. No,
America.
Goodness me. The Europeans wouldn't have thrust that upon the world. That's an American thing. Jazz, little boy, told he was a girl because he liked a sparkly bathing suit when he was like 5 years old. Raised as a girl. I mean, okay, go.
What has me in this conundrum would be I enter the men's restroom, and then a few moments later, in this other hypothetical world, Jazz enters the men's restroom. It's I don't think that's the best solution. Um, just because Jazz does look like a female. Like if I didn't know any better, if I didn't know the backstory, I would say that they were born female. That's the appearance. That's what it looks like. And I'm not saying I'd be feeling uncomfortable. I don't know. I've never experienced that, so I don't know what that would feel like. Right? I have no idea. But I imagine Jazz likely would feel uncomfortable. Would Jazz be safe? Be safer in the men's and the women's? Probably not in the men's. I, I think it would be a very strange circumstance. And with that being said, I think we ought. My solution would be to make bathroom stalls like private, and then it doesn't really matter what bathroom. We can have one bathroom because everything's private. And then if there's men like by the hand washing area, you know, that's good. Hopefully there'll be if there is a man who wants to do sexual assault, right? At least there's other men in there that can hopefully stop that act.
Are there though? Are you guaranteeing me that if my 13-year-old daughter goes to the bathroom, there's going to be a good guy in there to save her if there's a sex offender? You can't
No,
guarantee
no,
that. I'll tell you
definitely
what.
not
I'll
guaranteed.
tell you my solution. I mean, first of all, you mustn't hold Jazz in your mind when you're thinking about this, because let's be clear about this. Most of them don't look like Jazz. Most men who present as women do not look like women. They look like men in some way or another. I think the solution is, first, bathrooms are self-policing, and we can I'm not even I do think that women deserve single sex spaces, all spaces. Bathrooms are self-policing, and I think if you are a trans identified man like Jazz and your mother committed a terrible crime and set you on that medical pathway, then you can pass. Nobody's going to even know that you're a man. Okay, bathrooms are
Mm-hmm.
self-policing, just like the women on testosterone who look exactly like men, normally very short men, but they still look like men. Like Buck Angel doesn't belong in a woman's bathroom because she looks like a man. So they're self-policing, and if you pass, you're probably going to be able to slip through. But let's face it, most of them don't pass, and they have no business being in the women's bathroom. But I would just like respect for women and an understanding of why we need female-only spaces and why we are more comfortable in female-only spaces. And I would like all the trans-identified men to understand that they're not. If they look like men, which most of them do, they're not welcome in female-only spaces. And what the societal change that I think needs to occur, because we have a male and a female right now, is female, strictly for females only, and then mixed. The other space can be the mixed space, and that can be your men who dress as women. That can be, the women who say right now, there's so many women, the left, the lib femmes out there saying, they don't mind sharing with trans women, so-called. They can go in that mixed space as well because they don't really mind. They don't think men are a risk. That's fine. You can go and use that one. And the women who want female-only spaces for their comfort, safety, and protection, they can have them.
Okay. That might be combining or modifying my idea slightly. So
yeah, it is. But
still
it's
keep with two. Yeah.
The most important thing is female spaces for women and girls who want them. And then the other space, do whatever you want with it, mixed, free for all.
In this with this strategy, this hypothetical world, the woman's only space. If there is someone who transitioned and they do pass, since it's self-policing, are they allowed in?
They can sneak in. We would never know. Like the
Okay.
trans activists honestly think that women like me are going to stand on the door and do genital checks and stuff. It's like, no, are you kidding? Why would I even want to do that? But if somebody passes and they go in, I'm also not, I'm not the type. I'm 5'2" and I'm tiny. I'm certainly not the type of person who would ever confront somebody suspicious in the bathrooms. But I also wouldn't, because I have friends who are butch lesbians who have been confronted, and this is a recent thing, and this is what trans activism has done to society, is these butch lesbians are being confronted in the women's bathrooms because people think they're men. I have detransitioner friends who went testosterone, mastectomy and everything, and they get confronted in the women's bathrooms. And so it's a great big giant mess that trans activism created because they decided to just like tear up the fabric of reality and restructure it around their paraphilic desires. But I don't see that there's a simple solution. Certain spaces, it's simple. I mean, changing rooms where there's nudity, it's pretty damn obvious whether you're male or female. Spaces that are not self-policing, like prisons and rape shelters and everything, that's much easier. No men are allowed in there. But bathrooms, it's messy and it's difficult, and I just think the way forward, and it's almost impossible to imagine, but the way forward is men, whether they identify as women or not, but the ones who identify as women need to understand that women want those spaces for their own safety and protection, and you're not welcome in them, so don't use them. Have some respect for women. I don't see us getting there anytime soon.
Well, listening to you say all that about women who look masculine, detransitioners, you probably weren't trying to convince me of this, but I think you probably have. I think the best solution is really just to not have these big, large bathrooms with stalls, and just to have unisex bathrooms everywhere.
Well, but I mean, what's happened, they've done, trans activism got that, that was their thing. They've done unisex bathrooms. I think
Mhm.
I used to be a reporter, and I covered a story in UBC, University of British Columbia, where they had done this. They had done, okay, trans, like for the sake of this tiny number of people, we will restructure everything and have gender neutral bathrooms. And there was a guy who had like planted, I don't know how he'd done it, like a camera into the bathroom, and he had stored on his computer like images of women in the cubicle and everything. Like, men will find a way. Sex offenders, if you give them the chance, predators are always on the prowl. Sex offenders are always looking for victims and ways to access their victims. And if you're setting up gender neutral spaces, you're giving access. You're allowing sex offenders to access their victims easier. If that's what you want to do, if you're okay with putting women and girls at risk, then so be it. I don't believe that's acceptable. I think women and girls should not have to be put at risk because some people have decided that they want to live as members of the opposite sex. Just honestly, just the mixed sex spaces, like female only, mixed. That's it. It's really quite simple. The reason why it won't work, though, is because it's not validating, right? If a man who thinks he's a woman, him using the women's spaces is validating to him. I mean, these autogynephilic men, that's one of the fantasies, right? Is being in a woman's space. They get turned on by it. It's part of the fantasy. So if you're taking away his right to access women's spaces, he's not going to be very happy about that because it destroys the fantasy.
I'm thinking about your solution. I'm thinking about um, what the hell's the word? My brain is starting to go. Unisex bathrooms. I'm comparing these two. You talked about predators, putting cameras in, versus like the harm that might be caused by, if we're comparing that to just straight up men's, women's, like detransitioners, butch lesbians, you said. um, comparing those two, I think the what I would want to look for, just in comparison of those two alone, if those are the two options. Obviously, there's that third option that you were talking about, and it's not a bad option. But if we go back to those other two, I think the what I would want to look for was the amount of harm that opening that door to, like, let's say the unisex bathrooms, how much harm actually occurs, like how many sex predators are doing that, right? Versus how often it would happen in a regular men's women's bathroom. The
The
harm then
problem
that
with that is
versus
then you have to have victims. You have to set it up, and then you have to wait for women to be the victims of sex offences. It worked rather well. It was an imperfect system prior to the madness of trans rights and this whole modern trans rights movement. It worked rather well. We had a good system. Men are not allowed in these spaces, they're reserved for women. If a dodgy looking man, walked into a women's space, somebody would say something. Okay, now he can just wander in, or it's a unisex space, he has every right to be there. He's not even suspicious. It wasn't perfect, no safeguarding is, but the way we had it set up before was the best possible way for it to be set up. Any other way is going to put women and girls at risk. You're coming at it, I think, from some risk is acceptable. I'm coming at it with no, absolutely not. I don't see why I should have to. And I have a
no,
13-year-old daughter, and I don't see why she should have to either.
I was saying that there's risk on both sides, meaning like the butch lesbians, you said, like they go in, excuse me, they go into the women's bathroom, obviously where they belong, and I like them being like confronted or
Well, but
violence, right?
we
I
can get
don't.
away from that if we can go back to where we were. We're only there because we live in this mad world where any old man can walk into the women's space and use that space, because we're living, well, I don't know actually where you are, but Canada, like we have sex and gender identity protected in law, which is completely insane. You can't protect both. It's a zero sum. Like if you protect gender identity, you are not protecting people by their biological sex. You cannot protect both. So in Canada, we're in a situation where literally any man can walk into a woman's any space designated for women, and he has every right to be there because he can just say that he has this magical female essence. So we're living in that world, and therefore everybody's on edge. You see someone who looks suspicious and you're like, God, is he a sex offender? Because all the sex offenders are allowed in our spaces. Okay, but if we went back to no, actually random blokes just can't walk into women's spaces, you can challenge them, then we might settle back into the way it was, where we have trust that people respect the right that women have to these spaces, and therefore we wouldn't have to feel so on edge in our spaces and constantly be on the lookout for the random sex offender who's chosen to come in that day.
When do you think this shift occurred? Was it like early 2000s, later 2000s, 2010s?
The sex offenders in women's spaces?
No, just like the mindset shift from, like you said, like when people are on edge, right? They don't know who's going to be entering their space, right? So
It's
they're
yeah, I mean it's pretty late. It's all the result of trans activism. So there was pivotal moment was 2006 with something called the Jakarta Principles, which was a group of like human rights lawyers and trans activists met in Jakarta, Indonesia, and drew up the blueprint for trans activism, which was basically, in order to accommodate our every demand, you have to abolish protecting biological sex and separate spaces by gender identity and all kinds of insane demands. That filtered. Ontario added gender identity in 2012. I think we were one of the first in the world to separate. Well, we thought that we were protecting gender identity and biological sex. For some reason, nobody saw that you can't protect both. So we added it, and then it just kind of a cascade of harm to women and girls just spread across the world from around 2012 onwards, where the demands of trans activism, the concern for women's safety was secondary to the demands of trans activism. But the actual real harm would not have started until trans activism kicked off and really ramped into high gear, which would have been 2015. Then it became you were a bad person if you thought that women deserve their own spaces, or you were a bad person if you thought that lesbians had the right to be lesbians. Kind of, you were a bad person if you lived in reality. That didn't really start until 2015, 2016.
Just kind of, I'd like to share kind of my thoughts and based on my experience. So, obviously, I'm in my 30s, so I have memories from before all of this occurred, right? Just kind of, I don't know. There's nothing objective here. It's a very subjective reasoning and thoughts. But I would imagine, like even thinking back to like my high school, if somebody entered in either bathroom, particularly male, I'm male. I don't know what happens in the female restrooms, right? But if a person were to enter into it, and they appeared to be like very feminine, but they weren't, you know, they're and they entered into it. I just imagine that potentially could result in violence. I mean, probably most of the time, no, but I could have seen that back in 2007, 2008.
Oh, if somebody feminine looking went into the male bathroom?
Yeah, and they
Could
were
result in violence. You see, you're making
sure.
my argument for me, and trans activists do this all the time too. They make my argument for me because when they say that these, men with women's souls are a terrible risk in the men's bathroom because the men's bathrooms are so crazy and dangerous, it's like, why would I want men in my bathroom then? If men are so dangerous that, somebody dressed in an unusual way is at risk of being raped or murdered or whatever, why should women throw open the doors to their spaces and welcome in any man who chooses to enter if men are that dangerous?
Yeah, and I guess that's why I understand totally your perspective. Like I think you're right? And there's the term I would like to use would be like bad actor. Like if any man can enter a women's restroom, the sex offenders might be the first to take advantage of that system, right? It makes sense. Like totally get it on board. I suppose I don't know. I just want I want a system that works. That's what I want. I want everybody to be safe. That's what I want.
Yeah, I mean, again, it would be helpful if we tried to avert the need for medical transition. And this is okay. Here, wait for this. People are going to accuse me of genocide now. But if we limit as much as possible the number of people who go down this medical path and therefore need this kind of accommodation, because if a man is taking hormones and presenting as a woman, he thinks that gives him the right to enter women's spaces. So it actually becomes a problem. We have to figure out what to do with him. Women say, no, we don't want you in our spaces. And you're telling me that he'll be attacked if he walks into the men's room. So it's a problem. It throws off the order of society that has worked for so long. So again, that comes back to, let's try and reduce the number of people who are going down this harsh medical pathway that's not going to make their lives easier in any way whatsoever. And of course, trans activists will say, oh, these are, innately transgender people and you're denying them necessary medical care and accommodations. But they're not. They're not innately transgender people at all. They're people who, for a variety of reasons, have come to the conclusion that their lives will be better living as members of the opposite sex. Try and help them figure out what that is, and try and help them accept their body and accept their reality, and move through the world in an easier way.
I think I agree with that. Like, I think people should accept who they are and be comfortable in their own skin, generally.
As much as possible. I mean, who's really
yeah.
comfortable in their own skin?
Yeah, you're right. Maybe super attractive people. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. After like an hour and a half, I think my brain starts to get a little burnt out. But before it gets completely burnt out, I want to ask you if there's anything that you wanted to talk about or we didn't get to talk about that you'd like to.
Well, one of my favorite subjects is the male lesbian. Can we go there?
Sure.
Before we finish it? Because I think it's really important that most people who support trans rights support it because they think it's the next gay rights. I know that from my adventures around Canada, trying not to lose all of my friends, because I come from the left politically, and all of the when I immigrated to Canada, all of the friends that I made were on the left, and most of them were super woke, and I was a little bit woke too. It's embarrassing. And then when I figured out that I was the whole gender issue, and I was turfing on Facebook, I faced losing all of my friends, and it was a terrible situation. And so it was a case of get them to see why I believe what I believe, and that I'm not just some evil transphobe, or lose all my friends. And so the technique that I used was, we talked about autogynephilia, but most of the time how I reached my friends was explaining to them the harm to the lesbian community and the gay community as well, but mostly lesbians, because all of my friends were good people and they supported trans rights because they supported gay rights and they thought they were doing the right thing. And when you allow men to be women, then you create the mad, insane concept of the male lesbian. It can't be avoided. Because if he's a heterosexual man, but he's now a woman, he's magically transformed into a woman, and he's attracted to women, he's therefore a lesbian. And we are now at the completely insane, mad stage that lesbians are not allowed to meet without the presence of these autogynephilic men who think that they're lesbians. And I always, when I am talking to good, decent, left-leaning people who only support trans rights because they think it's harmless and it's just a minority of people who need accommodations, I always talk to them about the harm to the lesbian community, and that there are real consequences to untethering society from reality. And the lesbian community, the first TERFs were lesbians because they were the first ones who noticed, oh, these men think they're actually women and therefore they think they're lesbians, and the lesbian bars, that they don't even exist anymore because they got closed down because lesbians can't meet without the presence of these men, so they don't meet. I have tons of lesbian friends who meet in secret because they can't meet anywhere without autogynephilic men showing up. So I think people need to understand that there's an enormous conflict of rights, and there is no LGBT community. There is the LGB, and then there is the T that is a direct attack on the LGB. I mean, it's the same with gay men as well. There are, to a lesser extent, women who think they're men, heterosexual women who think they're men. They're attracted to men, so they think they're gay men. But women are just less pushy than autogynephilic men. They are invading the gay spaces, but there's fewer of them. Remember that the vast majority of the trans-identified men are autogynephilic men, and most of them think they're lesbians, and they think that lesbians are bigots. Those Stonewall that I mentioned earlier, Stonewall was the biggest gay rights charity, won all of the victories in the UK for gay rights, was an enormously beneficial force of good in the world, adopted trans rights after they won gay rights. And then the CEO of Stonewall once called lesbians sexual racists for refusing these men who think they're lesbians. I think she compared it to apartheid. So there's a massive direct attack, to the point that I would say if you support trans rights, you are by default homophobic. You might not be deliberately homophobic, but you support something deeply homophobic. So you're kind of a homophobe.
I want to make sure I'm picking this up right, and I think I am. So we got lesbian bars. We got people who have transitioned, who are still attracted to females, who are presenting as females, entering these establishments. The existing patrons don't like that. They want out of there. Like, I don't go to bars. I don't know anything about bars. A gay bar typically, I'm assuming, would be like kind of like a dating, meet others you want to date environment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's not just bars though. Lesbian dating apps, it's a big thing, right? If lesbians on lesbian dating apps specify in their bio females only, they get banned for being transphobic. So basically, on a lesbian dating app, you're not allowed to be a lesbian because that's transphobic. Being a lesbian is transphobic. As long as you understand that, you've got it. Being a lesbian is transphobic.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say with regards to dating, you're probably gonna have sex, I'd imagine, right? That's kind of goes with it. Unless you're religious and then you get married. That's not part of this. Why am I saying that? But sex is part of that. So with that being said, you may want, I would say you probably should disclose what sex you are rather than what gender you are, because it has more to do with sex than
well, it's not about stealth. I mean, honest to God, do you think I have like on my phone, I used to have, when I was losing all my friends hated me and I had to like show them what I meant. I had a folder on my phone of male lesbians, and I'd taken these photographs from male lesbian dating apps, just screenshots. They're not fooling anyone. It's not like you get into you're in the bedroom and then you realize, oh, you're an autogynephilic man. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No one's fooling anyone. Like, it's a bloke. It's blatantly a bloke, and he thinks he's a lesbian. And in the madness of our world, the lesbians are the bigots for saying, I'm not interested in him. The lesbians are the bigots.
Oh, that's the problem.
Lesbians are bigots because because trans women are women. And if trans women are women and the ones who are attracted to women, then they're lesbians. You're a bigot if you don't accept them.
I didn't realize that was the point. Yeah, I don't. That's insane.
I think lesbians have the right to meet just women. I think they have the right to their lesbian events that are just for women. They're just for lesbians. And I just think they have that right. They have the right to meet. Like in Australia, like a month ago, the Australian Human Rights Commission ruled that lesbians do not have the right to meet just with women. They must include these these men who think they're lesbians. I think, because I support gay rights and I support the right of lesbians, to be same-sex attracted, I think they should have the right to meet without the presence of men. But bear in mind, think about who these men are. They're for the most part, autogynephilic men. That's part of the fantasy. These autogynephilic men, they have a paraphilia. They've been probably masturbating for many years to the thought of being a lesbian, and now society has given them a free pass to invade lesbian spaces. Think of the power trip. The lesbians are the ones who are bad people, they're bigots, they're transphobes, and they are persecuted for not welcoming these autogynephilic men into their spaces. Is that not homophobic? And completely insane?
I don't know if homophobic would be the word I would use, but I would say that, like, if you want to have a lesbian bar and you just want it to be
Lesbians?
cis women, right?
There's no such thing
cis
as
lesbians.
cis. Are you kidding? No.
Just I gotta use a word that people are gonna understand. I gotta use a word.
Lesbians. Everyone actually does know what a lesbian is. And no matter how far down the insane gender rabbit hole you are, you know, every single person knows that no man can be a lesbian. Everyone knows that. You might be trying to convince yourself that you're a good person and you support trans rights and, yeah, some men are lesbians, but come on. Everyone knows that they're not.
But I was gonna basically agree with you, just so you're aware. Before the apparent loaded language, yeah, I was
cis.
saying, like,
I hate the word cis. What the hell is that? Why would we have a word cis? What's the point of it? It's stupid.
Well, I think it's a good distinction, like, with regards to who has transitioned, who hasn't transitioned. Like, you kind of know what it means, right?
Nope. I think it's pointless. We don't need the a label for people who are not trans. Just like some people are deaf, but we don't go around talking about the hearing able and the deaf. We just accept the fact that a small number of people are deaf and everybody else is just, you know, women. There's some women are deaf. I'm not a hearing abled woman. Same thing with cis. What is that? What does that mean? That if you're using cis, you are suggesting that there are two types of women, right? You're turning me into a subcategory of my own sex. You're saying I'm a cis woman, and then this is a trans woman. I'm saying there is no such thing. There are women. There are some men who think they're women. There are some women who think they're men, but there are just women. You don't need a subcategory of women.
You chose an interesting example. You said, like, hearing abled. I know that's not one word. It's not like one term, but is it not a term?
Well, some people are diabetic. Should we all go around with insulin producing? No, of course not. You don't need another category of women. Okay, like, I am willing to accept that some people. I never use the term trans women because they're no kind of women. Trans-identified male, men who identify as women. But I mean, if you want to, it's muddling. If you use the word trans woman, it's too confusing. It messes with people's comprehension, I find. But I guess you can have women and trans women if you need to go down that route. I don't need a prefix because there's no other type of woman.
What term would you use instead?
Woman. I told you, but I don't use trans women. You see, it's much clearer in my mind because I don't use any of the language of gender identity ideology. I don't use any of it. I don't respect pronouns, or I use pronouns that are grounded in reality. I don't use these silly terms like trans women and trans men, none of that. I just use very clear language, and that helps with clarity of thought. There's no muddling in my mind.
And I've been talking to you for an hour and 50 minutes, so you'd think I would know what terms you've been using. If I remember correctly, you were just kind of like providing a definition each time, like not full out definition, but like you were saying, males who have transitioned or something like that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, I have all kinds of. It's not the most concise way to speak, I've got to say.
Yeah,
Sometimes I edge towards being a little bit sarcastic. A man with a woman's soul, or a man with magical female essence, or something, because I do mock it because it's stupid. Like this whole idea that some men are women, it deserves mockery because it is stupid. But yeah, I would say a man who identifies as a woman, that's the furthest I will go. A man who thinks he's a woman, men who have medically altered their bodies, a man who's had his penis cut off. I don't know. It's not
yeah.
ideal for polite society.
I prefer a shorter phrase, so all of that doesn't have to be said.
Trans-identified male. We've got that one. I've used that one. Okay. Trans-identified male, and that grounds you in reality. Like you've got like he's male. Let's be clear. He's male. He'll always be male. Nothing will ever change that. I'm willing to. I could have used that all the way through, but I'm more colorful.
Okay. But how about we talk for? You got 10 minutes?
Sure.
10 more minutes? Okay. Let's talk for 10 more minutes. Just because you brought up something that I think, well, it's important to me anyway. And I talk about this quite frequently. And recently there's been just people who viciously disagree with me. And I don't know, it's been a little bit heartbreaking, quite frankly. I think the way that we settle our societal differences, belief differences, anything that we have that's causing friction between one another, I think it's by non-confrontational dialogue. That is my firm belief. I think when we start to get into heated debates, name calling, whatever you have, all the bad stuff, the unproductive stuff, in my opinion, I don't see that as solving very much.
No, of course not.
I guess I'd like to learn your thoughts on it. What do you think?
I long for I'm in my late 40s now, so the 90s was when I was a teenager, in my 20s, when we used to go to the pub or we used to go over to someone's house and we would argue, we would disagree, we would have huge fights, but we stayed friends. We didn't hate each other. We didn't block. You couldn't block because there was no internet back then, no social media, but we need to be able to disagree. It's, in fact, I prefer conversations. We haven't strictly disagreed. We don't agree on everything. We haven't disagreed that much, but conversations are so much more interesting when you disagree in a civil way. And we've lost that ability, and we need to bring it back because we're really struggling. We're really suffering without it. And how it's so boring to constantly, I've seen it, like I'm in the gender critical world, and there are sections of it that have they've spiraled to the point that they're in a purity spiral where they will not tolerate even the slightest deviation from their extreme opinion. And it's very bad. It's not a healthy way to live. And friendships breaking up all over the place. And no, bring back disagreement. Have a really passionate argument, and then still be friends the next day. That's how we used to do it.
Yeah, I don't mind disagreement. Disagreement is fine. I think that's how we grow and learn shit and
of course
become better people. Yeah, absolutely. I think when it's done in such a vicious way that you can no longer be friends, right? Like, what good was that? You didn't learn anything. The other person didn't learn anything.
But it's not, I mean, my experience is recently, it hasn't been a vicious way. It's just been, somebody expresses a difference of opinion or uses the wrong pronoun, God forbid, and that's it. They're cast out. Nobody will talk to them. They're an enemy. They're the villain. it's not like nobody. I'm not suggesting we all start screaming insults in each other's faces and everything. Like, but we've lost the ability to even have slight disagreements, even with people on your own side, just slight deviations of opinion. We've lost that ability. So yeah, we need to grow up. We're behaving like toddlers. Like I interviewed Gurinder Bogle not long ago, and he has that wonderful term neo-toddlerism. Everyone's just going around behaving like toddlers, thinking that they can create some kind of utopia by having a temper tantrum and breaking off friendships all over the place. We need to grow up and learn how to disagree again.
I agree. We're on the same page there.
There.
All right, Reed is actually in the chat here.
Hi, Reed.
He asked this thoughts on the SSE event. What are your thoughts on that?
I really enjoyed it. I'm sure I've mentioned this to Reed before, but once the camera stops, I forget everything. It's a remarkable ability. So I remember it was fun. Nick and I are going to record in a couple of weeks' time. That will be an interesting conversation because he and I were so opposites, and I don't think I reached him on very much. I don't think I swayed his opinion very much. So it'll be interesting to talk to him. But no, I really enjoyed it. What about you?
Yeah, I really liked it too. Like everybody stayed extremely civil. It was extremely good in that respect. I think there was a lot of mutual understanding too. I definitely understood you. I understood Nick. I think Nick understood you even though he disagreed. I'm assuming you understood him even though he disagreed. It seemed like it anyway.
Yeah, I did. It's just there wasn't a lot of movement.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm guilty of that, but I fully admit to being an extremist. But I'm only an extremist because I've spent 5 solid years living and breathing this issue, and everything I've learned has pushed me into a very solid position. And in order for me to move a mat would require extraordinary evidence at this point, because I've just spent so long thinking about it and reading about it and writing about it. But for Nick, there wasn't a lot of movement, and I don't know that he has spent 5 years living and breathing this debate. So I'll talk to him in a couple of weeks. We've had a crazy email exchange going.
Yeah, you were telling me a little bit about it. Yeah. Nick's a good guy. I really like Nick. Yeah. If you're going to do, hopefully he doesn't mind me, and hopefully you don't mind me sharing. If you're going to do the blind SE stuff.
No, I said no to that. It's too confusing.
Yeah, you said no? Okay.
I did.
Yeah, you kind of have to be really into street epistemology. You really have to kind of nerd out on it a little bit.
I don't think I'm ready for that yet. No.
Apparently not. Yeah. You're not there yet.
No.
Okay. Yeah. Anyways, my final comment on the SSE event in Florida. I just wish it was got a little bit deeper, and I think we got a little deeper today. So, yeah,
we certainly did.
That was my only nitpick, but otherwise, I thought it was great. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
I don't have anything else. Do you have any other words before I end the stream?
No, I've said plenty. Probably said enough and then some.
All right. Well, thank you for letting me talk to you for 2 hours now. I thought it went pretty well, and yeah, that's all. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. Gonna play the outro.
If you've watched this far, you know what to do. Don't miss what's next. The choice is on you. Stay in the loop, keep your feet in line. Hit that bell, catch me live next time. It's simple, it's quick, but it means a lot. Stay connected, see the moves I've got. No promises, no fluff, just what's real. Subscribe and the update seal the deal. Subscribe, hit the bell, and I'll see you The stream's done now, but the content won't stop. So stay in the loop till I'm back at the top.